G'day Fishers, Brent from Tackle World Port Stephens with our weekly fishing report. What can I report? Murray cod, carp, trout, all coming down the bay. No, just kidding, plenty of fresh water around. You must be living under a rock or you get flushed out if you haven't seen how much rain Port Stephens has had in the last 48 hours. But anyway, it's a good thing because it'll actually make the fishing better or improve the fishing. A flush is always good, especially for the estuary system, believe it or not. It also is good for the offshore fishing. So it has been fantastic. Fishing has been great up until this point, only because no one can get offshore at the moment. But we've had reports of Spanish mackerel. Rod caught one on a soft plastic there last week at Broughton. We've had plenty of reports of cobia. We actually weighed one last Sunday that was caught off the rocks around about 20 kilos. I think it was just over 20 and a half kilos. So the fishing has been sensational up until this point. A little bit of an unknown, only because we just can't get out there. But what to expect this weekend? Now, yes, fresh water will be pushing down the bay. So my suggestion is, if you want to fish in the bay, which is probably your best option, is to fish from Soldiers Point to the east up to the heads and try and fish the incoming tides where you're going to get that push of salt water from the ocean, if there is any left. But in saying that, the fishing is pretty good once we have a big flush. From experience, living here for a long, long time, probably too long now, the fishing is pretty good after we get a bit of water running down the system. So what species would I go on target? Well, firstly, the bream will probably come down with that water and set along the breakwalls there at Nelson Bay and the anchorage. So a good time to go on target bream. Big flatties also come down with that water. So any of the suspect spots like Wanda Headland fishes really well after a bit of fresh for flathead. So too does Corlett around the groins. Any of those beaches back towards Shoal Bay and even Shoal Bay itself on the eastern end of Shoal Bay fish really, really well for flathead. And if you're going to do that, brighter soft plastics or brighter hard bodies will be the trick, so those fish can pick up on them. And then obviously over the other side there, the shortcut wall fishes really well for bream once the mole flushes out, and also Jimmy's Beach for your flatties. So there are options, believe it or not, to go fishing, and I reckon it's going to be good over the next couple of weeks, especially leading into Easter. You'll find the longtails, they'll push in with the high tide, so they'll actually feed on the dirty waterline. Quite interesting to see, especially once that fresh water settles over the next 2 weeks. You'll see a distinct line when that tide comes in. The bait hangs on that line, and away you go, the longtails will be there. And speaking of which, Harley did that just this week and caught a really nice one, about 18 kilos, spinning one of those up. Actually on a surface lure, so he did really well, sight casting a longtail inside the bay. No mean feat, that one. She's pretty difficult to land a longtail in the bay, but if you persevere and do the right thing, you will catch them. So that's my suggestion this weekend inside the bay at the moment. Obviously the rocks, like I said, we did weigh a cobia that came from the rocks there. It's going to be pretty tough with that swell. Keep an eye, maybe a little bit of a window later in the weekend, but keep an eye on the rocks there. I reckon the snapper will chew off their heads after this bit of swell. So if you're keen on your snapper fishing off the rocks, you may get a little window down towards Boat Harbour and all those areas that get a little bit of protection from the easterly swell. So definitely snapper off the rocks. And there'll be pelagics around once the water clears. Obviously, typically your bonito and your longtails will still be there, and there's plenty of time to catch those. It's only March, April, May being the two best months, in my opinion, for the longtails. So the beaches, again, it's going to be a little bit hard with that swell. You may get a little bit of protection up towards the spit at Fingal. There have been some really good bream up there at the moment. And again, bream will be on the beaches now, so plenty of bream around, and some good whiting as well. The good cured beach worms, the king worm trays have been working really well up there at the moment. So you might get a little bit of a chance on those protected corners. Maybe 1 mile is open to the easterly, maybe the northern side of Samurai there might be a little bit protected this weekend if you're keen to give the beach fishing a go. Now on the offshore sea, well, that's just been, unfortunately, this weekend, I think it's going to be a write-off. There was a little bit of cooler water that came down with that northerly last week, but judging by the air temperature, they might have pushed back in. We'll wait and see if that water's pushed in. There's still plenty of time to catch an inshore black marlin if that water's pushed in there, and away we go. So all in all, this weekend's going to be a little bit hit and miss, I think, but I think the bay's going to be your best bet. If you see the swell down, maybe have a look at the beaches. If you're going to fish the rocks, be a little bit careful. It may be worth a snapper fish for those that are experienced in fishing big seas. But anyway, that fresh is going to do us good. So we'll talk next week, and I'm sure we'll see a few good fish caught this weekend.